Right, so I'm here today with one of my patrons, Richard Barr, who's going to interview me, fire a few questions. So over to you, Richard.
Hello, Mr. Luke.
Hello, Richard.
Trebitsch is finished the lines in sight.
Yeah. It took me a while to get there. The final page was written a few times, rewritten a few times over the years. It was quite a wrestle.
These aren't the questions I'm going to ask you. Just talking about it now.
Uh,
Just a bit of background, which is it's been in your head for a long time, hasn't it? Because I remember you've been talking about this from you moved in with me for a short spell after you were home from Oxford. You know, you've been talking. First of all, it was Monday, and from Monday came Trebitsch, and this has been something you've been working on this period. These people for a good 10 years.
yeah, close to. So we were looking into Jabez Balfour, who was a sort of a one-man Enron in the 1890s, and he used a church to control various board seats in banks and insurance companies. And then we had Horatio Bottomley, who used the presses to create propaganda purpose. Monty Gregory, who was Lloyd George's honours broker, and they were all to form one sort of big crime story. And Trebitsch was sort of pinballing about in the background, and it got to the point where I realised that Trebitsch's narrative didn't really fit. It didn't really tie the story together, or a trip through the story in the way that, say, that Bubbles does in The Wire, where he moves through the various points in the narrative and his arc changed. So I took Trebitsch out of the story, and then found that Trebitsch was a more interesting part. He was the character I really wanted to move with, and could, by looking at his character arc, could tell so much of history of the world at that time because of the international factor.
Okay. Well, I'll get to the prepared questions then. A little vague, some more so than others. First question: the dramatic society he belonged to when he got out of school, the Royal Hungarian Academy of Dramatic Art. Yeah. What sort of actor was he? Had he talent?
I think he got kicked out.
Yes. For petty crime, apparently.
I'm not so sure about that. I think there was just a sort of a refusal to show up to classes, and he also just, I think, lost interest and drifted away. And he re-enrolled a year afterwards. He had lied about his age when he got in, so I think he enrolled when he was in the college when he was about 15.
Did he show any aptitude for acting, performing? I mean, officially, when you think about his life to come, his ability to morph, to be like a chameleon, to nearly shapeshift, and so you'd imagine he would have shown some aptitude as an actor.
Yeah.
But is there anything you've been able to uncover that pointed toward his talent or lack of?
Not really. We, in terms of the sort of the on the ground fact, we know that he was a bit of a mischief maker at school. I hypothesize that he was involved in the sort of riots regarding conductor Gustav Mahler's walk away from the performing arts scene in Budapest in the 1890s. But looking at Trebitsch's later career and his ability to impress people, to win them over, bring them into his confidence, just to charm them completely, there's no doubt that there's performance talent there.
Okay. Question 2. Yes, tell me about the mystical experience he had when he arrived in China what precipitated his conversion to Buddhism and subsequent joining up with the Warlords, etc., etc. Talk to me about this mystical experience, quote unquote, that I read about in my research of him today.
So this occurred in Tianjin in China, which I think is sort of, if I remember rightly, is around the center. It's not too far from Shanghai, and it occurred in the Astor House Hotel, mid 1925. He had already been in China a few years then, with Yang Sen and Wu Peifu, a few of the warlords, acting as her advisor. Although Wu Peifu would later deny that he knew him at all. But to be fair, he was using a pseudonym at that point. But we don't really know what exactly happened in that hotel room. Only that he told people he experienced a great epiphany and became aware of the enlightenment of the universe. Terms are sort of vague, and
do you believe him?
I do. I didn't.
You think it wasn't just another cutting of bullshit, no?
I think he believed what he experienced. The thing to understand about Trebitsch was he was profoundly mentally ill, and I think what happened to him in 1925 might have worked to stabilise him, but not for later events, the death of his son, the death of Max Bauer, and his inability just to stick with the Buddhist enlightenment. I think he genuinely believed he was in it for the genuine good. There's been a lot of talk about Trebitsch's links to the spy networks of the world, and there's a good argument to be made for that, and a good argument to be made for that being a part of his performance as a monk.
Well, one of the Nazis, I can't remember which, some high up Nazi wanted him to lead a expedition to Tibet.
Yes, this was a police attaché called Joseph Messenger, and this began with Trebitsch had befriended the doctor Hermann Urban, who was a Nazi in Shanghai at the time, and he had enjoyed close relationships with Louis Siefken, who ran the German bureau there, and of course at that time, so Trebitsch was intent on visiting Tibet, as he had been for about 10 years previously, and he thought to use his connections, and possibly with encouragement by Siefken and Urban, but certainly with their endorsement to Berlin, he pitched to broadcast a German propaganda radio station from Tibet, which was probably, he was probably thinking that it was Shanghai drenched in blood, war breaking out everywhere. Tibet was fairly safe.
He declared himself the next Dalai Lama, didn't
He did. Reports aren't, well, this is rumoured. He claimed to be the Dalai Lama, according to some reports. He claimed to be Panchen Lama, according to some reports. The Panchen Lama being the more Eastern accepted version, the Dalai Lama being the more Western accepted version. He often claimed to be both at the same time, along with claiming to be the Lama Dorjai Din, which had some occultist and crime gang connections.
Right, cool.
So he certainly had a finger in each pie.
Tell me about his family and how they coped with the constant moving, his duplicity. What impact did it have on Margaret and his children? You mentioned there about the son died
Yeah.
young. Yeah.
That's a really good question. I think essential to the story that I'm telling. Um, his relationship with his wife was initially quite stormy.
Can I ask as well, just quickly, how was she privy to all his skullduggery? Did he keep her in the dark?
I think he did. He told her, he impressed her with how well she was provided for, but she would occasionally uncover letters where he had asked various people in political and high society circles for loans of great amount of money. At the same time that he had assured her that there was thousands coming in from European oil wells. Um, and I think there was definitely, from when he left her pre-war, that was the beginning of a long-term split. It was always there in the background. His obsession with traveling, which was like a disease, brought them further and further apart. Margarethe was devoted to him. His sons thought very highly of him, but this was sort of wore down over time as he would bring them with him to one place when he thought he'd get settled, and then they would travel somewhere else, and the whole family would be up sticks, or Trebitsch would simply leave them behind and say, I'll send for you when the time is right. And
that's what he did when he went to America, isn't it?
Yep, when he went to Germany, when he went to China, when he went to Indochina, yeah, pretty much. And his son John was his eldest son. Was probably the greatest tragedy of all. So John left. He enrolled in. He came back to England, distanced himself from, changed his name. Actually, the boy's name was Ignatius. He changed his name to John to distance himself from his father, and ended up when he was involved in a murder. A lot of the stigma of being Trebitsch's son sort of fell upon him, and probably contributed to him getting the death penalty.
Okay. Just on that, the Wanderlust, what drove his Wanderlust? Could he not have just settled down? He seemed like he was skilled and talented enough that he could have become some mandarin in the Palace of Westminster. He could have become reasonably high up in the civil service. What drove these delusions and these constant, I suppose this is a vaguest question of all, these changes of character so much, these changes of identity, the chameleonization of himself, like chameleon-like transformations he made all through his life. Why didn't he just settle down? He seemed like he could have had the potential to have been something, if he had just settled in something, to have done something pretty monumental in politics or diplomacy. What drove the Wanderlust, and was it madness?
Well, I'll go with the chameleon thing first. I mean, this was pretty much the tendency of Jews, European Jews of that period. Possibly some of it was due to anti-Semitism, but I'm not so sure. Yeah, that's an element, but a lot of it is just sort of going into new cultures and learning to absorb that and make it a part of them, and that's a good trait to have, to sort of to interact with your new environment. For Trebitsch, and he could have achieved. He could have been.
What prevented him from settling down? Just
greed for adventure, greed for life-changing experiences. He was a very greedy soul. He was supremely egotistical. His favourite subject was himself. um, he just, I think he must have just got bored very quickly. I guess there's a number of us sort of get bored sitting in our homes and need to go out to do a day's work or take ourselves on holidays or whatever. But Trebitsch seemed to get bored of whatever town or village or city or nation that he was in, and it seemed to be an essential part of his life to cross borders.
He hit the restart button an awful lot, didn't he? I mean, he would establish himself somewhere, make contacts, establish a circle, and then just like that, he'd steal away like a thief in the night and hit the restart button and want to go and re-establish himself elsewhere. Seemed to be to his detriment more than anything.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
Yeah, he just had, I guess, with people, he would just, I guess, seeing his cover blown, or he was very bad tempered, so he would rather than try and sort of argue out one element that didn't work for him or solve a problem, he would just napalm everything and march away until such a time that people had forgotten or had moved on, and then he would return.
Like a whack-a-mole. Bash him on one side and he pops up on the other.
Yeah.
Final question then. Tell me about his involvement in the Kapp Putsch, and also his what would have been a very short-lived career as a press censor.
Yeah.
Because it didn't last too long, did it?
No.
And also, final part of this question is his very brief meeting with Hitler. What was discussed, do you know, and what was his impression and Hitler's of him? Because also, as an addendum to that, didn't he write which possibly might have led to his assassination by the Nazis, he wrote a letter to the Nazis slagging them off for the Holocaust?
Yeah, I'll come on to Hitler in a moment, but it was a Kapp Putsch, which was early 1920. The Kapp Putsch was came a couple of years before the Munich Beer Hall Putsch, which Hitler was involved in. The Kapp Putsch was particularly bloody throughout Germany, but it only became so in Berlin, where Trebitsch was press censor on the last day. It lasted 5 days that Trebitsch and his friends were in control of the government, and it was pretty much a farce. Trebitsch got the job of press censor just through befriending a number of journalists, politicians, soldiers, particularly Max Bauer, who was Ludendorff's henchman in World War One, and he got to know Ludendorff quite well, and they were very good friends until they fell out. So as press censor, he had just been released from British custody, and he was writing all over British letters and being really micromanaging and just a total dick. Hitler. I recently found a exclusive scoop, a photo of Trebitsch and Hitler together.
Wow.
I'm not sure of the authenticity of it. It's been talked about in a number of, shall we say, lesser academic historian sources. The only provable, or the only sturdy connection between Trebitsch and Hitler that I can see, and actually, sorry, before I come on to that, of the rumours,
they did meet once.
They did meet once, yeah. It was said that Trebitsch funded one of Hitler's magazines, but again, it's not provable in my opinion. But they met on the last day of the Putsch, and Hitler had flown in from Munich with his pilot just to see what was going on, just to take part in it, and everything was falling apart. All the new regime had all begun to quit, and one of the hotels they'd taken over, everybody was just leaving it, and Trebitsch going up the stairs and shouted, and he turned and saw them and shouted down, "No, it's all fallen to bits, it's all over." And I think Dietrich Eckart possibly was Hitler's wingman. He recognised Trebitsch, knew who he was, knew that he was a Jew, and he touched Adolf on the shoulder and he says, "Man, there's really nothing to see. I know that man, he's a scoundrel. Come on, let's go." And
he said this to Hitler about Trebitsch?
Yeah.
Yeah, he said that to Hitler. Little did he know what.
Yeah. Their paths, yes, crossed about 20 years later. In 1940,
41, wasn't it?
41, actually, their paths almost crossed. They'd almost meet again 20 years later when Trebitsch pitched to be alone in a room with Hitler and revealed to him the divine truth of the Buddha, which would help him win the war. And in about 1942, Trebitsch was becoming seriously ill mentally, and he wrote a massively angry letter to Hitler about how he was just so wrong and so misguided, and he needed to cease his folly, and retribution was going to come upon him. And while this was probably quite possibly ignored, with all the trouble Trebitsch had made from the "I will reveal the divine truth of the Buddha" episode, it's quite possible that it certainly alerted the German consulate to his presence in Shanghai and brought about his internment.
Was it the case that, do you think he was poisoned, assassinated? I was reading that today, there was some speculation.
Yeah, it's I just take the notion that there was no provable evidence. It's a twofold thing. I mean, he was hospitalized for problems with his intestines, which he did have a history of. But also, when one of his friends went to visit him in the hospital, he said, "They're coming to get me. I may have been poisoned. Come and visit me every day." And the next day she went to visit him and he had disappeared. She was told he was in a room in another part of the hospital, that he had been given special treatment. It was kind of hinted that somebody wanted him sort of kept safe, somebody with VIV powers, but it's unknown whether she saw him or not.
Okay. Well, all I'll say in conclusion is, while he engages in much skullduggery, a lot of his choices would be described at best as morally ambiguous. He was nevertheless a very, very fascinating character. His ability to inculcate himself with such a wide range of extreme political ideologies. I mean, he goes from Buddhist to far right in with a Kapp Putsch, you know. I mean, chronologically that's not the right way around, but you know, he was a member of the Liberal Party in his early days. His knack of that word again, chameleonizing himself, is pretty uncanny. So,
absolutely, one of the 20th century's most fascinating figures.
But yet, not much attention has been afforded him, has it really? When you think of the vastness and the complexity and, you know, dramatic potential in his story, it's surprising that there hasn't been the Hollywood blockbuster, the ITV miniseries, etc., etc.
Even the Radio 4 drama, yeah, or documentary.
Well, here's a question I think I'm going to ask you, and it's just occurred to me. Why is that, when you think?
Oh, that's a really good one.
Is he too controversial? Is that it?
I don't know if it's that. No. Jeffrey Archer, eh? I think he's too fantastical. I think one of the notions that one of the things I've discovered in trying to adapt his story and even part fiction is that it's very difficult to outfiction Trebitsch. He's A-gamed it already.
What's that saying again? You couldn't make it up?
You couldn't make it up. And perhaps given Hollywood's current hard-on for superhero blockbusters, perhaps supervillain is the next thing, and Trebitsch will get his moment in the spotlight. I think it's going to happen.
That's a nice place to end it.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Andy.